In this feature highlight video, we will look at the different capabilities for data type validation in the Trisotech Digital Enterprise Suite. For this highlight video, I'm going to be using the decision modeler, but what I'm doing here with data types is also possible in our other modelers, such as the case modeler and the workflow modeler as well. I have created for this example a very simple hello world that will just say hello to us, and I've added a little bit of a spin on it when I've added a qualifier based on the age to say whether we're young or old, and it's basically just saying hello world. What's more interesting here is the data type that defines the person that we want to say hi to. It is defined as a first, last name, email, and age. So let's see how we can turn on some data validation for this. So going into it, we can, for instance, use an enumeration evaluation for a text field where we could say, okay, my first name need to be either John or Jane. Here we're going to close that to just John or Jane. Clicking here would also allow me to accept a null value or no value as a valid value for this. After that, we can say, okay, my email, I want to be a little bit more fancy, and I want to add an expression here that will say this is on the Trisotech domain. So to do that, the expression I can build here is the same as unary tests that are used in the cells of decision tables. So it is either an expression that has an implicit value like greater than 10, for instance, or we should use the question mark to make the value explicit. So here I will want to say ends with my value and at trisotech.com. So this will create a quick validation that my email is on a trisotech.com domain. Now for my age, I can define that as an interval from 5 to 100 years. All right. Based on that, we can start testing this model. Go here under execution and test, and because our UI picks up this enumeration, now it's a drop-down. It's hard for me to put an incorrect value there. I'll show you the validation when we look at the REST API. This generates a little bit later. And the email is going to be x@x.com, and the age, I'm going to put something invalid in there. So when I click here to submit it, I'm going to get in red default messages for that. x@x.com does not satisfy the expression ends with trisotech.com, and 1 is not in the range 5 to 100. So those are not necessarily the best validation message. That's why I'm going to show you pretty soon how to change those, but let's just validate this with some valid data and see that now I can submit it and get the proper result. One thing you may be interested in looking into is that the default value for the validation level for testing and deployment is set to none. So when we deploy here, we have the data type validation that can be either non-external data input or always, that will control how much data aggressive we are with the data validation. By default, it's at none, so it will never fail on data validation, but you can change it to external data input, so that's every time we receive data from the external of our service. So starting it, so definitely 1. If we have a process service or a case service, it's when we receive messages, when we receive user inputs, things like that. And always will be every time we write to an output, it's going to be validated as with the data validation. So this could be pretty aggressive and should be used probably only for testing purposes, and oftentimes when we deploy to production the services, we should use the external data input here. So that would be to publish, but the data validation is also controlled for the testing. So if I go under File and Preferences, I will have here the data type validation where when testing, by default, it's going to be a none. So that's why you would not get the same result as I did. I've moved it as always, which is my suggestion for when we do testing, to always get messages for the data validation. So let's get some better user messages in there. So for my email here, I'm going to add a validation message saying that the email needs to be on the Trisotech domain. So that will be the user message, but I also can enter a validation code. That validation code is going to be available through the API, but will be more of a system identifier that can be referenced. Invalid, email invalid. I can do the same for the age. The range 5 to 100. So I'm now using better validation messages. So let's redo this. And yeah. Oh, I had a good value there. Sorry about that. So now we can see we get the proper error messages. So that's one thing. So we can fully customize the error messages we're getting. Now, if we deploy this as a service, we're going to deploy it with the external data input. And once we do that, our service REST API will be extended to be able to also return HTTP code 400 for bad parameter when you submit data that is invalid. And here, I'm going to try it out. So here, it's easy for me to just put something else in my first name. And then I can execute this, and I'm getting my error messages. So my first message, I still use the default message here, but for my email validation, I have my code here. That's something that another service can rely on. My user message, and also the location when in my input payload the problem was actually located. So if I had deployed with here this set to none, the data type validation, and published it, refreshing here, I would not be able now to get 400s because the data would not be validated, and submitting any data, even invalid data, would just result in the service running anyway without validating the data. So basically, the data validation on a Trisotech platform is something that you need to turn on, and you can turn it on at 2 different levels when we get data from an external source, or always, and you should, for services that you publish, consider using the external input only for that.